welcome to the program. My guest is Bill Antholis. Bill is the CEO of the University of Virginia's Miller Center. You can find them online at millercenter.org. Bill, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
So glad you're here. I want to get your thoughts about the Trump administration, what we could be looking at, and how the scholarship and all the work that goes on at the Miller Center, how it sort of fits into that. But let's just start with some broad strokes, just your gut reaction as a scholar, as a citizen, looking at the victory of Donald Trump and what we're seeing right now in this moment in time on the eve of the inauguration is sort of cobbling together what his team and putting that together. What's crossed your mind over the last few weeks?
Well, it's absolutely an unprecedented president. We've never had a president with no government or military experience before. We've never had a president that really understands the new media technology and the new media environment that we're entering. Particularly, we've had one president before, at least, who's been an entertainer, but we've never had a president before whose entertainment persona is himself. And that's just fascinating, right? That in itself is an interesting thing to study. We've had scholars, including at the Miller Center, who have looked at presidents as celebrity. We've never had a celebrity become president of the United States before, and that's really interesting.
A celebrity, well, Reagan was a celebrity, but you don't mean that in the same way.
Not
he was
in the
a
same
celebrity
way.
For being other people
Exactly.
in movies.
Yeah, exactly. So we also have, without question, a controversial president-elect. He likes making controversy. This is part of his MO. And that in itself, for scholars of the presidency, is really interesting, particularly because there's an adage that you fight during a campaign and you make love during your governance period. Can he turn around and govern and engage in the kind of Washington, not just deal-making, the art of the deal, but the kind of Washington relationships that are essential to getting things done? And that's an interesting transition, small t transition, that's happening during the big T transition. And we're watching to see how that develops.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm remembering that, you know, when we talk about a guy who comes out of reality TV, so much of successful reality TV is about dramatizing and broadcasting conflict.
Right,
and he's put himself right at the middle of that in his shows, and now he's putting himself in the middle of that in the presidency.
Remember, he's succeeding it's exactly the right point. He's succeeding a president who loved the phrase, "No drama, Obama." And the American people do like change. We have very few instances in our country's history where a vice president has succeeded the sitting president of the United States. Sitting vice president succeeds the sitting president. George H.W. Bush. John Quincy Adams was the last time that you had a popularly elected vice president. We've had other vice presidents come in because the president died or was impeached or things like that. You have to go back to John Quincy Adams. Presidents, I mean, the American people like change. And so they went from no drama Obama to high drama Trump.
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting to watch. Can he sustain that? Can the American people sustain an affection for the kind of drama that he's about to bring?
You talk about how controversial he is. Take a moment and talk to the viewers who are truly frightened. I know some of these people very, very well. I mean, truly, to their core, they're not just concerned for America. They're concerned for their children. They're concerned for their loved ones. They're looking at apartments in Canada. I mean, they want to get out of here. They're scared. And for different reasons, but it all goes back to the election of Donald Trump.
Look, I'm not going to tell any of those people that they don't have reason to worry. We don't know yet. He hasn't become
of course,
president yet. I think he's still enjoying the freedom that comes from not sitting in the chair in the Oval Office. I think the experience of touring the Oval Office evidently woke him up a bit to that, and we'll see what that looks like. And I have my own set of concerns, including some very deep ones, and they happen to be ones, one of the reasons that I have those concerns is that they're not just ones that friends that I served with in the Clinton administration have, but people who served in recent Republican administrations, the last two Bush administrations going back to the Reagan administration share. So for instance, on the national security team, this goes to something that we've been looking at very carefully at the Miller Center. He's been appointing the members of his team
Right.
as individuals. An essential key to success and failure for presidents, particularly in their first year, which is a very dangerous period in any presidency. You have a new set of players, and they've never played together as a team. How will that team work? And do the key members of the team responsible for being playmakers, that is, not necessarily being the scorers, but the point guards that distribute the ball,
Right, right.
will they play that role? And if they don't do that, who will? Let me just give you an example. It'll take 2 minutes. Vice President Dick Cheney is somebody that we've worked with because we've done the official oral history for every president since Jimmy Carter. We interview the top 100 or so White House officials and cabinet members. At a recent dinner, we do those as confidential interviews, and then when those are about to be released, we release them. So he spent 5 days with us giving his confidential history of the Bush 43 administration. At some point in the hopefully not too distant future, that will be released. It's currently confidential. But in a dinner with a number of people around, Vice President Cheney told a story about the Bush 41 administration when he was Secretary of Defense. On paper, the best national security cabinet probably ever in American history. You had the President of the United States, who had been Vice President for 8 years. Before that was CIA Director. Before that was Ambassador to China.
Loads of experience.
Ambassador to the United Nations. Vice President Cheney, then Secretary of Defense Cheney, had been a senior member of Congress, had been White House Chief of Staff. Secretary of State James Baker had been Secretary of the Treasury and White House Chief of Staff. Colin Powell was the head of the National Security, was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Brent Scowcroft was National Security Advisor, had been National Security Advisor before. Unbelievable team on paper. When presented with a crisis, a failed coup in Panama, in his words, we screwed it up. Because we had never played those roles before, and we didn't know what each person should be doing. Fortunately, they learned from that mistake, and a month later, when the Berlin Wall fell, they had figured it out. And that
How to play as a team.
How to play as a team.
Yeah.
And that was maybe the most consequential moment in the last 60 years in American history, because it was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. If they miscalculated, something bad could have happened with Russia. If they had overreached, Russia might have come in. If they had sat back too far, Russia might have come in.
Right.
They had to have a constant dialogue with the East Germans, with the West Germans, with the Russians, with the other American allies. There's a nuanced game here that involves all of those pieces: military, intelligence, diplomatic, and the White House, and the president himself. What signals does he send and not send? One important thing that they learned, it was important for the president to remain silent. Will this White House learn that?
I was just thinking that.
Okay, those are the kinds
you talk
of things.
about playing as a team player, being a team player. You talk about nuance. One might strongly make the case here that those aren't exactly the cards that Donald Trump knows how to play very well.
The truth is, we don't know. We know what we know. We know what we've seen from the campaign. We don't know either in the campaign itself, in his business dealings, things that he's held back on. And before, we don't know where he's been silent about one thing.
And we
or
won't
another.
know for a few weeks.
And I will say, one of the reasons that he won, and again, understanding the controversy around the victory, didn't win the popular vote, won in some very important states, made key strategic decisions, remained very quiet about his strategy in those places. Yet they did surgical strikes. They got in there. His opponent was not in those states.
Right.
And he was very smart in the way that he did it. And very importantly, at 2 or 3 key moments in the campaign, he dialed it back. And his dialing it back and going silent actually helped when controversy was surrounding his opponent. So we're going to have to see if they can take the most successful things they did in the campaign and apply that on a consistent basis in the most important job, which is protecting the American people.
Bill, you mentioned Russia, and that certainly has been in the headlines recently, and not always for the right reasons or good reasons. But what's your read on that factor and that dynamic in a Trump administration? And specifically, what should we be watching for, based on your experience in Washington? What would help us understand that relationship and that dynamic going forward, so that we're not always chasing a headline and we're really understanding the real narrative that's taking place behind the scenes?
Well, look, this could be, I don't want to jump to the conclusion here, but this could bring down a presidency, okay? It is potentially a crisis that could happen on the president's first day of office, not necessarily a breach with the Russians and an engagement with the Russians, but his governing coalition, his ability to get his cabinet in place, his relations with the Congress. This is really major stuff. The fact that there are open hearings starting now about Russia's involvement in this election, where important members of a Republican-controlled Senate are openly opposing the president, where a big part of the conservative intellectual establishment is openly saying the president needs to embrace not just the intelligence on this issue, but the intelligence community. If the president-elect continues to go to war with fellow Republicans, a Republican establishment that has built up a set of views about Russia, and by Republican establishment, the Speaker of the House of the United States, as well as conservative intellectuals and the like, the intelligence community, not just the CIA, intelligence dimensions of the FBI, the National Security Agency, the Director of National Intelligence. Those are all different offices now.
Yeah.
We've balkanized our intelligence, but if all of our intelligence is saying the same thing, and the president tries to roll that back, it could undermine his relations with Congress. It could undermine his relations with those intelligence agencies and with the diplomatic corps, with the military corps. We have a whole system
Could hurt
in
him
place.
in every facet of anything he tries.
It could undermine.
Yeah.
It could undermine the key relationships to managing the government. I do think that he is aware of that, but I think this is somebody who has succeeded by doubling down when the criticism comes at him. If you'll remember, a year and a half ago now, it seems like forever ago, he made an offhand comment about John McCain. He said, "I like my war heroes not to have been captured."
Right.
Everybody thought he was dead in the water, and he stuck by it. And one of the things that has allowed him to survive, I think, is he says what's on his mind, he says what he believes, he doesn't back down. That's earned him a core base of supporters and has earned him a certain glowing respect in the media that is surprising. He doesn't always get facts right. Whether or not that's a lie is a debate, right? Does he intend to get the facts wrong?
I'm sitting here listening to you. You could be talking about George Bush. I mean, you could be talking about 43.
Look, many presidents have come under this kind of criticism, right?
Yeah,
Harry
exactly.
Truman did too.
He speaks his mind. He says what he thinks. He doesn't back down. He's not the smartest guy in the world, but I don't care.
Look, Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt, Harry Truman, George W. Bush, to some degree Lyndon Johnson, probably a more cagey character,
Yeah.
just as salty. And just as salty behind the scenes with a live microphone on. If you go to the Miller Center recordings, there was a recent movie on HBO called All the Way.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah,
Terrific
absolutely.
movie.
Yeah.
In private conversations with Martin Luther King, he said some pretty raunchy, racy things that are, if not on par with the Access Hollywood video about Donald Trump, are kind of in the same category, okay? We have had other profane presidents before.
Right.
The real test is, does that profanity, does that spontaneity undermine his ability to get things done in the relationships he needs? But going to precedent, including the George W. Bush precedent, not to mention the Bill Clinton precedent, this is a president elected without a popular majority. We've had two of those in the last 20 years, 25 years, including Bill Clinton. This is the third. Both President Clinton's first chief of staff, Mac McLarty, and President Bush's chief of staff, Andy Card, have told us that in that first year they had to fight hard for their legitimacy. He's going to have to fight hard for his legitimacy. Democrats are not going to give this to him. He will say, I could have won the popular vote. I was smarter strategically. He should say those things, frankly. But frankly, Democrats should also, for their own political reasons, say, you didn't win the popular vote.
You don't have a mandate.
You don't have a mandate.
Right.
Legitimacy has to be earned. and it's earned through relationships. It's a great German become American philosopher Hannah Arendt said, the difference between power and authority is power is that which you can do by yourself. Authority, legitimacy, is that which you do with other people. Our constitutional system gives some powers to the president, but it gives broad authority to the president working with Congress. And usually the things that last from an administration are things that are done in a bipartisan way. And he's really got to prove that.
You mentioned Hannah Arendt, and for those who have never read The Origins of Totalitarianism, I strongly recommend that you go out and read that right now. But we've seen that journalists really digging out their copy, and it's being quoted. I mean, I've been quoting it quite a bit on Facebook and in emails to friends, saying you really need to understand what she learned studying the fascists of the European fascists of the 1930s and 40s. That these are really strong takeaway lessons that we shouldn't forget.
One of her big, she was maybe, of contemporary political theories, maybe the most important one in my own PhD writing and development, which is the importance of Republican institutions. What are generally referred to as checks and balances, we think presidency, Congress, courts, that's obviously the core. The president is not a dictator. It's an executive actor embedded in a constitutional system. Institutions are only as good as the people that live in them and the ambitions that they try to live up to. And in the House and the Senate, that's on the Democratic and the Republican side. And I think you're starting to hear that. I hear from, I won't name him, but there's a terrific UVA grad who's working as a key staffer on Capitol Hill on the Republican side. And he says, this is really where Article 1 needs to stand up. And what he means there is Article 1 of the Constitution is about the Congress. The first article of the Constitution is about the Congress, not about the president. He's Article 2. Implication, we're number 1.
Yeah.
He's number 2. This is a moment where Congress needs to stand up and say what it cares about. And he's put out, President-elect Trump, has a huge list of priorities. Many people in Congress share most of those priorities. As issues, Democrat and Republican share the list. The Republicans that are in the majority share part of that list as their priority. He has his own list that it's a priority. Both of those sides, and if they want to include the Democrats, all of them have to narrow it down to a couple things. Because the truth of the matter is, the institutions are so complex, you can only get one or two things done.
Yeah. Let me take a quick break, and we'll pick up right there where we left off when we get back. We're talking with Bill Antholis. He is the CEO of the University of Virginia's Miller Center. It's millercenter.org. Stay with me. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking with Bill Antholis, the CEO of UVA's Miller Center. Bill, before we went to a break, you had mentioned the first year of a presidency. It's a make or break time. How do you read that year? How should we understand the plays that are being made? Is there anything seasonal going on that would help us give us a handle to get a grip on what's going on?
Sure. Well, this has been a big passion for us at the Miller Center for the last year and a half. We've been preparing for this moment. Presidential first years are really interesting conceptually in two ways. One is the national security piece we talked about before. You are at the depth of your experience as a person, the President of the United States, and the team. and you're dealing with big, scary things out there in the world, both things that will happen, policies you inherit that you don't understand, and things that will come at you. So 9/11 was a first-year crisis. The first bombing of the World Trade Center was in Bill Clinton's first year.
Right.
There's
exactly.
a pattern there, okay? Bay of Pigs in the Kennedy administration was in the first year. He inherited policies he didn't understand. He changed one or two things, totally screwed it up. When you asked Kennedy after his first year, somebody wanted to write a book, he said, why would people want to read a book about disasters? Bill Clinton's first year also had Mogadishu. He inherited a military engagement in East Africa that was left in the last year of Bush's administration. He changed one or two things. Black Hawk Down, total disaster. Bush 41, we already talked about. In addition to Tiananmen Square, in addition to the Berlin Wall fall and this failed coup in Panama, Tiananmen Square happened. But fortunately, he'd been ambassador to China, so he understood that a little better, managed that one okay. So first year is dangerous, number one. Number two, there's a very small legislative window to get things done. Lyndon Johnson, the master of the Senate, said this the best. You get 1 year before Congress stops thinking about you, the president, and starts thinking about their own re-election. That is a year into this.
Which is right around the corner, yeah.
They're now thinking about the midterm elections.
Yeah.
435 members of Congress get elected every 2 years. So in January of 2018, the full House of Congress will be thinking, full House of Representatives and a third of the Senate will be thinking, how do I get reelected? That gives him a 1 year window. As Bush 43's legislative affairs director, Dan Meyer, told us, there are the things you want to do, there are the things you have to do, and then there's confirmations on top of it. And floor time on the Senate of the United States is the most precious and scarce resource in the world. There's only so many hours in the day. And filibusters can take up a lot of those hours. So the things you want to do, he has a big legislative agenda. He's got 7 things on there. Let me see if I can rattle them off quickly. There's tax reform, immigration reform, trade reform. Obamacare, right, the ACA.
Immigration, did you say that?
I think I got immigration on there. Banking reform, right? He wants to do regulatory reform on the banks. Energy reform, he wants to get rid of cap and trade. I think that's 6. There's probably a 7th there. I'm going to have my Rick Perry moment, but the list was longer. Generally speaking, most presidents get 2 things done in their first year.
Really, that's it?
2 things, right? President Clinton had a major tax bill go through. He didn't get it done until August. In the fall of 1993, he got NAFTA. He had a choice between health care, Hillary's priority, and NAFTA, Al Gore's priority. He chose his vice president over his wife. They tried to do health care in the second year. They couldn't get it done.
Right.
Because everybody's worried about getting reelected. George W. Bush had a big tax reform bill in the first half of the year. He passed No Child Left Behind in the second half of the year, even after 9/11 happened, because he had planted the seeds in January of 2001
it was already going, yeah.
with Ted Kennedy. Obama got 3 things done in his first year. It was a major year, right? So you have the financial crisis hitting. He passes the Recovery Act in the first few months. He does Dodd-Frank banking reform in the spring of that year, still on the crest of public anxiety about the financial crisis. They reformed the banks. And then it still took him, it took him till the 13th month to pass Obamacare. So he just spent all his political capital in that first year. Now, among those stories, you see patterns of people working. Lyndon Johnson had the biggest first year ever in 1965. After being reelected, he got the Voting Rights Act, Medicare and Medicaid, immigration reform, and I think an amendment to the highway bill.
But he'd come down from the Hill, so
he knew
how the Hill worked, right?
Exactly, but he still, because he knew he only had a year of political capital. He got nothing done the rest of his presidency. LBJ and Obama both governed from the left lane. They did all their legislation with every liberal vote they could get. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush both went back to the middle lane. They got Clinton's tax bill was kind of left lane in the first half of the year. His fall support for NAFTA, he went back and worked with Republicans. George W. Bush did a right lane tax reform, and he moved back to the center lane for No Child Left Behind, working with Ted Kennedy and George Miller. So this is the issue for Trump. He's probably going to get a tax reform of some kind done. He may be able to do a little bit of trade in that. He may be able to do a little bit of I don't know, corporate reform, banking reform,
Deregulation.
something
Yeah.
in that.
In the spring, right off the bat.
In the spring, right off the bat.
Yeah.
He may try to do healthcare in that, but that could be really hard and tricky, and they're probably going to defer on that, right?
Right.
But
They'll do a
by defer-
symbolic dismantling of a repeal of Obamacare.
with great political challenges
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
because they could blow a hole in the deficit, and these fiscally conservative Republicans that tried to shut the government down under Obama might, in order to do tax reform, create an even bigger deficit.
Right,
so then
right.
they come back in the fall. What are they going to do? Is it going to be immigration? Is it going to be infrastructure? That was the one that I forgot. Right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be trade? Is it going to be energy? They're going to have to take on some bigger challenge while still passing. There's basic bills about when Dan Meyer said they're the things you have to do. There's basic keeping the government moving.
Right. It's going on all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Confirming a new cabinet. A Supreme Court justice is going to come through in this period, right? That is a huge legislative agenda. Two things. Watch what those two things are. It's totally fine that they haven't completely signaled what those things are.
But at some point they need to.
At some point they have to start showing their cards.
Yeah, and they need to be getting out in front of that and saying, this is what we're looking at for
This
the
is the
spring, this
priority.
is what we're looking at for the fall. Yeah.
Here, the key relationships to watch are, setting aside Donald Trump himself, Mike Pence, Paul Ryan, and Schumer. I saw that Donald Trump in a tweet last week referred to Schumer as a clown. I don't think you want to play the clown card too much.
It's not going to help him, is it?
It's not going to help him if he has a big agenda. And again, going back to, does he do a all in the right lane? We've had 3 outsider presidents in the last 30 years, 40 years, who have had elected from a party, and their party has controlled both houses of Congress. I think it's fair to say that Carter was an outsider, Clinton was an outsider, and Obama in his own way was an outsider. Carter completely blew it, right? He had almost the same set of issues that he was raising, couldn't work with a Congress of his own party. And he says in his oral history to the Miller Center, I didn't have those relationships. I didn't realize how important they were. If I had it all to do over again, I would have worked more on those relationships. Clinton figured it out, worked across party lines. NAFTA, in the 24 years since it was passed, I think I got the number right, 23 years, whatever it's been, that has stood the test of time. Trump is threatening NAFTA now, but he needs both houses of Congress to really overturn it. Obama went down the left lane, but the challenge of going down the left lane is the next president comes in, they can overturn that. Now we're seeing if Trump goes down the right lane on Obamacare,
They'll just repeal it all.
he can repeal it all.
Yeah.
Maybe with political damage, but maybe that means they've overreached, and then a left Democrat comes in and puts it all back into place.
Yeah.
So he has to think carefully if he's going to work across party lines, which usually has a longer legacy than governing with your own party.
But
what's the issue he's going to focus
on? It takes more
on?
nuance, it takes more personal relationships.
You can't call your main partner a clown.
Right. Bill, thank you for being here. Let's talk again
great to
soon.
be here.
We've run out of time. Bill Antholis is the CEO of the University of Virginia's Miller Center. You can learn more online at millercenter.org. And you can find the complete archive of this program online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other.